Welcome back in once again to the most accurate podcast here at 444 Fantasy. I'm Matt Okada, at Matt Okada on Twitter. This person is John Paulsen, at 444 John. How you doing on this Monday, the last Monday before the Monday that leads us into the season? I think that's accurate.
I'm getting asked about week one projections, which is my least favorite thing. 2 weeks before the season starts. I guess we're getting closer than that. We're a week and a change. Trying to keep preseason projections, draft projections, season-long projections, and week one updated as things happen next week is the biggest challenge of my job at the start of the season. But I'm not complaining.
This is pretty much the most chaotic week, I think, for fantasy, or at least for fantasy analysts and for people who are drafting. Fortunately, we have someone here to help us sort through the chaos because that's kind of exactly what he does. Greg Brainos, actually at CoachSpeakIndex on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, is probably how you all would recognize him. Welcome on. Thank you for coming. How you doing?
Doing well. Thank you so much for the invite. My pleasure to be here.
So give us, for those who don't know, or even for those who do, a little bit of background on who you are, what you do, where you're at, and we can find your stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been playing fantasy for a couple decades, and Coach Speak, I felt was the number one problem plaguing fantasy football for all those years. And just so many situations of, Jim Caldwell saying Calvin Johnson, he's 100%, definitely not going to be a decoy out there this week. And then he's a decoy. And then the breaking point for me was I had Joe Mixon in my home, like big money league in 2020. And Zach Taylor is calling him day to day for weeks. And then they put Joe Mixon on IR. He's out for the rest of the season from this day-to-day injury. Mm-hmm. And that was it. That was the straw that broke this camel's back. So I gotta do something to solve this problem. And at first it was, just keep like a little list of which coaches are known to be the most reliable, which coaches are known to be the least reliable. And then I thought, hindsight is 2020. I can just go back 6 years on every coach and look at everything that they've said, all their actionable coach speak from their press conferences and transcripts, put that in a database. It's going to take a lot of time, but I think it'll be worth it when it ends up being finished. It took me a couple years to build that. And it's been super, super helpful to me, and sounds like it's been helpful to a lot of other people too. So I'm glad we finally have a Coach Speak Index, because I felt like we needed it for so long. I can't believe no one created one up to this point, honestly.
Yeah, that's really the crazy thing to me is this is such a saturated industry, fantasy analysis. But among all the different experts on all the different things that people had talked about or specialized in, no one had done this. And then you came along, and now I think everybody goes to you for this kind of stuff. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. I think it just points to the need that there was for this. Like, that's why there's been such a groundswell, and it's kind of really snowballing now at this point.
Well, can I just add that, I think I saw Evan Silva retweet you, and I dug into your stuff and retweeted you and to follow this guy, because this is the reason this wasn't ever done before. Is it makes my brain hurt thinking about the amount of research that you would have to do. Like, literally, going back and listening to either listening or reading every press conference, and then trying to pick out what's actionable, what's not actionable, and then what's correct and what's not correct, and going back, not even just looking at like what they're saying, but also what actually happened that week, and marrying those two so that whether or not they were correct or incorrect. It just makes this is like that emoji with the brain exploding. That's why it hasn't been done before. So kudos to you for this great project.
I appreciate it. Yeah, so people, a real fantasy is like, I wish I could go back in time, like 10 years or 5 years or whatever. I would not want to go back in time, because I do not want to rebuild this thing all over again, man. It took so much time, but I knew that it was going to be worth it in the end, and here we are.
So we're going to ask several more questions kind of along those lines, figure out both how you've built this thing and then what you've learned from it, especially this year. Before we get to that, because it's very, very hot off the presses news, off the pressers news is what we should really say. This Patriots quarterback situation. The head coach, the quarterbacks, who's starting, who's playing better. It's very confusing. I have no idea what's going on. I'm a Patriots fan. So can you tell us what's going on yet? Or are we still trying to figure it out?
I can give my best attempt
Okay.
at breaking down exactly what's going on here. So this entire time, this starts before they even drafted Drake May. At the owners' meeting, reporters asked Gerard Mayo about Drake May. He says, well, he's got this incredible ceiling. We all know that, but you have to think about what is the floor with this guy. Okay, then they end up drafting him. And then, they're talking about, we have this development plan for Drake May, and they play him three snaps in that first preseason game. And this was just part of the plan. He was going to get one series, and we didn't want to put him back out there because the offensive line starters weren't out there. But then at the same time, Mayo is saying that the offensive line, like the state of the offensive line, isn't a factor in whether they, put Drake May out there. So all these, and also, like, why can't you just put your starting offensive lineman back out for one series? You're the coach. You're in charge of this. You can do that. So we get that, and then we see Drake May play really, really well in the second preseason game. We see him play really well in the third preseason game. This entire time, Alex Van Pelt and Gerard Mayo are still talking about this development plan. They're talking about, you have to look at the entire body of work of Jacoby Brissett. He's done really good things in this league. They keep talking about his experience. Alex Van Pelt loves that. Gerard Mayo really loves that. They almost seem at times like they did not want to draft Drake May. Like maybe it was coming from above and being forced on them. But then, so last night after the game, we get this quote from Mayo, where he says that Drake May is their second best quarterback on their roster right now.
Yep.
And he reiterates this thing that he's been saying throughout the offseason, that we are going to play the best players. Like, I don't care who it is. We're going to play the best players. Then he goes on the radio this morning, and he says that this is a true competition, which they've been saying it's a quarterback competition. Drake has outplayed Jacoby. Now, in saying that, we have to take in the full body of work going all the way back to the spring and the beginning of training camp, which is very odd to me. Like, why are we looking at that period? Like, you shouldn't be basing things off of that period. Why aren't you basing things off of how these guys look right now? Like, Drake May has progressed throughout this offseason and training camp. Let's look at how the guys are doing now. So that's a very weird thing. And then then he holds a press conference a couple hours ago, and I just dropped this into the CoachSpeakIndex Discord just before I jumped on. But a lot of like really juicy quotes of they ask him about QB1. He says, I would say it starts in practice and also in the game where Drake has played better. And then he says everyone wants to know who the starter is going to be. I think there are multiple factors that go into that. One is total body of work. Again, he's like playing the hits already. Yeah. Another is the overall experience. Another thing that he's kept saying, he says that May has gotten more comfortable with the scheme and the players around him. Like, so there's some development there. He says, you've seen rookie QBs perform at a high level. I don't know how the story ends with Drake's rookie season, but all possibilities are open, and we'll see what happens as far as who we name the starter, which they're going to name in a day or two. And then he says if Jacoby Brissett is the starter, May could see the field through injury or a lack of performance by the offense as a whole. So to me, it seems like they really, really want to start Jacoby Brissett to start the season. But I think we could absolutely see Drake May by week 5. Like, I just don't believe in Jacoby Brissett and the state of the offensive line. Like, really, you should be playing Drake May because he has the tools. True. When these guys are, when the pocket's collapsing and the rushers are getting in, like we saw that last night in the game with him taking off for like a 17-yard run on 3rd and 14. Like, he's your best. If you actually want the best players out there, which you said that Drake May is playing better than Jacoby Brissett, and you look at the tools, right? They've talked about all the tools that Jacoby Brissett has. He's comfortable in the offense, all that stuff. But Drake May actually has better tools for your offense, like that will help you win. Like, Jacoby Brissett doesn't have the wheels that May has, and he's not showing like the touch or any of these other things that you want your quarterback to have. Drake May is outperforming him at a very high level right now. Very, very weird, very boomerish stuff from Gerard Mayo.
Okay, so really quick, worth noting, the Patriots bye is not till week 14. So that's really rough. If you want to do the switch on the bye thing that a lot of teams will end up doing, that's probably not happening. So to your point, likely to happen more in the first month type of thing when, spoiler alert, this offense is not very good, which is what he said. Maybe there'd be a switch after. John, I'm curious to know from you, does this matter for fantasy at all? Are you changing any picks if May versus Brissett, or are you taking May late if he's a starter?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really a super flex 2-quarterback type question. I mean, nobody's running around drafting Jacoby Brissett or Drake May in a 1-quarterback league. I actually have a dilemma in mind. My point per first down super flex league. I took Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels to start the draft, and I haven't taken a quarterback, and we're almost a third quarterback. We're in the 14th round. I'm sitting here looking at Aiden O'Connell, Michael Penix, Jacoby Brissett, Sam Howell. That's who's left. So I was kind of wondering, like, oh, maybe I'll take Brissett, but the bye weeks here for Jackson and Daniels are week 14, and he's week 14.
Ooh,
so that doesn't even work. I think I might just be punting week 14 guys. I think that's what I've come to the conclusion there. I think right now I have May ahead of Brissett and in the season rankings. And when I did my, how soon do rookie quarterbacks start, it's usually like week 3 or 4 on average if they're not already the starter, the clear starter by week 1. It's usually just a couple 3 weeks in. Those teams are usually bad. They get a couple losses, then pressure starts to mount. And especially in this situation where he's playing well in the preseason, there's going to be all sorts of pressure on them to get him into the lineup.
The other thing that this brings up for me, question-wise for you, Greg, you mentioned how you built the database for all the coaches that, had some quote-unquote tape, I guess you could call it. When a new coach who has not been a head coach or really even hasn't been, a publicly speaking coordinator or something like that, or a college head coach or anything with background tape, how do you build that in, and how do you start to evaluate that when it comes to guys like Mayo or others?
Yeah, it's very tough. The only thing that you can really do is to look for very clear signals. Is what the head coach is saying. Does that go along with what the offensive coordinator is saying? Which isn't always the case. We saw this in Cincinnati where Zach Taylor would say one thing and Brian Callahan would say another. Callahan wanted to keep Joe Mixon on the field all 3 downs. Zach Taylor said, we want Samaje Perine in there on 3rd downs. Of course, the head coach ends up winning there. But you look for like a synergy between head coach, offensive coordinator, and what they're doing on the field, like in the preseason games. We've heard Callahan and offensive coordinator Nick Holtz for the Titans the entire offseason say Tony Pollard, Tajay Spears are interchangeable. They're 1A, they're 1B. And then we see in the preseason, that's exactly how they are using them. And then you also look for, are these coaches saying things that contradict what they've previously said? And how often is that happening? That's happening a lot with Jerod Mayo right now. So yeah, it's just those kind of signals that you look out for. And I don't want to, just because what Callahan has said, ended up being true, that's just a sample size of one thing right there. So I'm not trying to like just hold on to it. It's like, okay, we could be headed in this direction right now. He could end up being an honest coach, but I just don't want like any sort of bias in there. Just kind of let it run its course, and we'll find out over time. Sure.
All right, let's get into some of these coach-based questions. So, right off the top, obviously, some fantasy fans, some football fans have learned over time the coaches that we believe are unreliable, talking out of who knows where. In your opinion, or in your index, what are a couple or a few of the most reliable coaches? And then after that, we'll get to least reliable. But off the top, most reliable guys who, when they speak or when they say something important, you just pretty much take them at their word.
So Nick Sirianni is one. I think he's at least 85%, maybe 90% in all 4 categories. But they also, like, he doesn't get asked these types of questions a lot right now because it's kind of very clear, like, oh, it's AJ Brown, it's Devonta Smith, it's Dallas Goedert. Like, there aren't a lot of depth questions, player usage questions. There's no injury stuff right now with the Eagles. Dan Campbell and Kyle Shanahan, two like very blunt head coaches. Like Dan Campbell will tell you exactly what the situation is with a player. You listen to him talking about Khalif Raymond, and then you compare that to the way that he talks about Donovan Peoples-Jones. Very different. There's that one of my favorite pieces of Coach Speak was last year. They had signed Denzel Mims, and the reporter asked him, "Hey, what's going on with Denzel Mims? How's he doing?" And Dan Campbell says, "He's in the room. That's about all I could tell you." And they cut him like the next day. So yeah, when then you look at what Dan Campbell has said about Jameson Williams in the past, before October of 2023, saying we just got to keep working. He's got some drops. We just got to keep working with this guy. He's not there yet. And then we see in October, and this also coincides with Matt Harmon's perception charting of Jameson Williams, where beforehand, like really bad, after mid-October, starts to look pretty good, actually. And that's around the time that Dan Campbell is saying, all right, like we got to use this guy in more creative ways. We have to get him involved. We saw career highs in snap percentage, targets, receiving yards, catches. And then this offseason, you have Dan Campbell saying that he's really pushing for that full-time starting role. He's a man on a mission. All the beat report stuff about him in camp is very glowing. So that's trending in a great direction. I just love having these very honest, blunt coaches. Todd Bowles is kind of in that same boat where if a guy isn't pulling his weight or if he messed up or whatever, like he'll just call him out publicly, not in a Dennis Allen sort of way, but he'll say like, yeah, he needs to be better. He's not burying him. He's just saying like he needs to be better. So when he's talking about a guy like Jalen McMillan, and he's saying basically he's ahead of all these non-Mike Evans, non-Chris Godwin guys, and he's versatile, and that goes in hand with what they've been saying about how they want to bump Chris Godwin back into the slot. And you just look at all these pieces that are really going, fit in well with each other. And I love those kinds of coaches.
Out of curiosity, just based off the names you just listed, do you have any feel for whether like the players' coaches, just by demeanor, often come in with this more blunt honesty? Like, does that play into how you view things at all?
Yeah, I don't. To me, it's more about just like the psychological makeup of these people. It's like when Brandon Staley, first couple of years in the league, pretty reliable with this coach speak. Then he's on the hot seat for season 3. Back is really up against the wall. Then the gamesmanship starts to come out. Same thing that we saw with Brian Daboll last year, right? Coming off of success, and maybe pointing in the right direction, and then Saquon Barkley, he's a natural healer. Like he does have a chance to play this Thursday night. Well, we don't see him for like 2 or 3 more weeks. So it's I think there's just, I mean, they're all their own people. They have just different psychological profiles, but kind of go into these buckets of like Nick Sirianni. Like he's just like, he doesn't care. Yeah. He thinks he's better than you. He thinks he's gonna be able to beat you like without having to play games. So that's just how it is. And Dan Campbell, like this is just who Dan Campbell is. Like he can't help but just be a straight shooter.
Yeah, I would just add on the Jameson Williams things. I mentioned his quotes to people, and they were just like, "Well, that's just that's just coach speak, right?" And I'm like, "Well, that's Dan Campbell coach speak. It's different than somebody else's coach speak." And that question just makes me go back to their personality. Like, how comfortable are they lying? How comfortable are they being deceptive? Do they place the chances of winning are going to increase because they lie about a player's injury or lie about whatever you call it gamesmanship, but it's basically just not telling the truth in order to try to trick your opponent into preparing for Saquon Barkley or whatever the situation is. So to me, it's like when you get these guys like Dan Campbell, you could take what they say to the bank, but you could tell on the surface what type of person Dan Campbell is. And And you don't go into it thinking, okay, he's honest. You have to obviously look at the numbers, and that's what I love so much about the CoachSpeakIndex is it's all data driven. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's math, but it is, and it's all about here's the 10 things that they said, and 7 of them were correct, so you get 70% rating. You mentioned you had 4 different categories. Can you go over those real quick?
Yeah, it's injury, it's depth chart, player usage / workload, and then transactions. Cool. And when I created, when I was first building it, I was thinking, a coach will be honest across the board, or they'll be unreliable across the board, and that that's just not the case. In fact, Zach Taylor, super unreliable on injury coach speak, but pretty damn reliable on player usage and workload coach speak. So recognizing that on the first coach that I started on, which was Pete Carroll, who had just a fascinating coach speak profile, was very key into like, okay, I have to separate these into categories.
Yeah, I'm sort of sad that Pete Carroll's not still currently a coach, because I would have loved to get the breakdown on Pete Carroll. We'll save that for another time, maybe off the clock. But he was the one that stood out most to me over the years. Is like, what is this guy saying? Well, there are some of those guys now, though. So we heard of some of the most reliable. What about least reliable? And maybe it's only in certain of the 4 categories, or maybe there's some guys who are just awful across the board.
Yeah, there's a few guys that pretty much across the board, it's just, man, you're not getting much reliable info from them. And we actually got rid of the 2 worst this past coaching cycle with Bill Belichick and Arthur Smith.
Okay.
But the new king of unreliability is probably Robert Saleh, and then Sean McDermott and Matt Eberflus are also kind of in that boat. The real like danger zone to me is 65%. That's when it starts being like, oh, okay, I don't know, which seems like 65%. That's more than half the time, but like I view it as, I mean, we're playing fantasy for a lot of money. Like let's pretend like we're playing for our lives. Like, are you comfortable with a 35% chance of something bad happening to you? Yeah, right. So 75%, I'm starting to feel better. Once we get into that 85% range, like that's when I'm starting to feel really good.
And if those guys are the worst across the board, are there any who are standout terrible in, I don't know if terrible is the right word, standout unreliable in certain categories, maybe not across the board, but where if listeners or fantasy players hear these people talking about that specific category that they're awful in, we know to really take that with a huge grain of salt?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the Zach Taylor of the really unreliable in injury coach speak, which he is very self-aware of. Like, he references this during press conferences sometime. Yeah, of they'll ask him for a timeline on an injury, and he'll say like, I mean, you guys know how I am with timelines. It's very funny to hear him reference that. Yeah, maybe we'll get a CoachSpeakIndex shout out from him one day. Be a nice full circle moment.
We need to have you on in a year or two to see what Jim Harbaugh, his numbers are. He looks he looks a little crazy.
I have his numbers from his San Francisco days.
Okay, I was wondering about that.
Yeah, and that was a lot of fun. It kind of work to go through. I think it was 4 years that he had in San Francisco. But oh my God, just like what an absolutely fascinating human being! Like, oh, just unreal. And obviously there's the like coach speak stuff, right? Which is fun. And then there's just the like the pure entertainment factor of how much he talks about Judge Judy in his conferences and how much he loves Judge Judy. Then there was a press conference where I forget exactly what the question was about, like, oh, could you, like, you were watching a referee, whatever, and you seem like really focused in on. He said, I just love watching people who do their jobs well, like do their jobs. He said once, I think he said for an hour or for hours, he would sit and watch people direct traffic.
Wow.
Yeah, and I tweeted that out. And one of his former players in college, I think maybe it was like San Diego State or something, where he was, or San Diego. But one of his former players replied to me. He said, "Yes, this is absolutely true." He said, "I watched Jim Harbaugh once when we were all eating. He watched the like lunch person, put food on trays
No.
20 minutes straight. Yeah, he's just like
my
they're
God.
watching her." Incredible. But his reliability, like he seems like he's probably not a reliable guy, right? Because we get all this, I'm not medically qualified to say, I'm not medically qualified to say. But when he does actually say something, then you can take that to the bank. He's a 90% on injury coach speak. And recently there's a whole thing with Justin Herbert of like, I'm not even qualified to relay what the medical personnel, have told me. But then he said something at the end like, he's actually coming along quite well, and like basically no worries with him. And now we see Justin Herbert just like crushing it at practice right now. So yeah, pretty reliable guy.
Yeah, I'm looking at your site and his page. He's basically 75% or better in all 4 categories, which was surprising, but I guess that makes sense. He either evades a question, or if he does answer, he gives you actionable information.
Right, and that's because the reliability ratings are based only on actionable coach speak. It's not like, this guy evades, so he's not reliable. It's like, no, when they give us a piece of actionable coach speak, which I define as they're telling us that this thing that they're saying has a better than 50% chance of happening, right? So like, we hope this guy will be available on Sunday. That's not actionable coach speak that goes into the database, but like, we expect him to play on Sunday and goes in there. And that's, another great thing with the database is the language matches, because we all have our own vocabulary sets. These coaches aren't poets, they're using the same phrases, oftentimes just subconsciously. So for instance, like with Pete Carroll, when he would say, this player has a good chance of suiting up this week, that's less than 50% to happen. But when he said a player has a really good chance of playing this week, that was like 75-80% chance of happening. Yeah,
that's fascinating. I assume this means that Bill Belichick had just NAs across the board, because he never answers any questions.
And when he did answer, it was usually unreliable. So yeah.
Okay, before we get into some of the specific storylines of this offseason, just curious if you have any off the top of your head that have a certain reputation in the fan or fantasy football industry or the Twitter streets, but that you would view differently through your index.
Yeah, I mean, so Jim Harbaugh is one. Sean McVay is another. Just wild to me when he would say something about like Puka recently or whatever, and people say, you can't trust Sean McVay. Like, are you kidding me? He's one of the most reliable coaches when it comes to injury coach speak. There's no coach in the league who's more candid about a player's injury than Sean McVay is. Like, he will tell you if he doesn't expect someone to play, or if there's a chance that they might not play. And just 90% reliability rating on injury coach speak. And then when he says that there's no worries, it's like, okay, yeah, we don't have to worry about this at all. So him saying that Puka Nacua would be not only available for week 1, but he would be available for that week of prep going into week 1. That was a good like small window to buy the dip on Puka there.
Okay, good to know. All right, let's get into this offseason a little bit, or this coming season, really. First, just generally speaking, are there any major storylines or like fantasy community herd mentalities that you've seen that you just think are inaccurate based off of what you do? Whether it's something coaches have said that everyone has latched onto that you don't feel is correct, general consensus on someone, what stands out to you, if anything?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of this stuff of, and Mike McDaniel made this point of, we keep expecting things to be a certain way, right? Just like
how they've been is how they'll always be.
Exactly. Yeah. So the Mike McDaniel, traditionally not using the tight end position that much. Well, he didn't use the tight end position that much because he didn't have the personnel. He had Durham Smythe, he had Mike Gesicki attempting the gritty down there. Now he actually has someone in Jonnu Smith who he calls a master of yak. And this entire offense is just yak guys. Like they went out and got Malik Washington in the draft, like really big yak guy. We know Tyreek Hill, we know Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane. Like these are his type of players. So them getting Jonnu, I think, is really big for this offense. He's talked about how multiple it will make them. I think Minnesota is a situation that people are expecting Kevin O'Connell to like really keep passing the ball at a really high rate, but he's talked about how they want to establish the run, and if you look at their personnel that they have really good pass or run blocking tight ends and guys like Josh Oliver. He talks about CJ Ham a decent amount, their fullback, and how they use him. And like they no longer have Kirk Cousins, and we saw. He comes from the McVay tree. We saw Sean McVay last season run the ball at a higher rate than he's ever run. I think that's probably going to continue again this year for him. McVay is seeing these linebacking cores get smaller and smaller. So what does he do? He goes out, he beefs up the offensive line. He gets a replicate of Kyron Williams there. So I don't think we should be surprised if we see Minnesota run the ball at a higher clip. Not saying that they're going to become an Arthur Smith offense all of a sudden, but I do think that they absolutely want to use Aaron Jones quite a bit in this offense, and also Ty Chandler, who they like a lot. And that's that will, by establishing that run game, they'll help out Darnold and whoever's throwing the ball back there a lot more.
Yeah, in the projections, I had to look at O'Connell with a different quarterback. So I used his pass run splits after the Cousins injury, which also featured some more running quarterbacks, Dobbs and the other
Mullins.
Not Mullins, the other guy.
There's another
guy. Mullins was a game or two.
But
he had a game maybe.
I try to block out the Vikings if I can.
But
O'Connell was 62.5% in 2022, 61.6%. Both of those are well ahead of the average
That's
NFL
pass percentage.
Yeah, pass run splits.
Yeah.
So I've got him at 581, 58.1%, which is what he pass run after Cousins got hurt. Now you also have Darnold, who can run. But that still puts them over 600 pass attempts. So that might be something. As you were talking, Greg, I was like looking at my projections, trying to figure out like where should that number be to how heavy do they go? And if they do go, if it's more like 55%, then Aaron Jones would probably shoot up the projections a good bit, because right now he's kind of languishing in those RB2 rankings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're big fans of Aaron Jones, but I believe. Like it sounds like they're going to use him in kind of a similar way that Green Bay used him. Like he's talked about Aaron Jones's age, and well, he still has more tread than a running back that age, just because of the way that he was used in Green Bay. But at the same time, he has this injury history, and they believe in Ty Chandler a lot. So I think we'll see really high value touches for Aaron Jones. We are going to see him get a lot of passing work. Like we'll see him at the goal line when they're there, but I expect Ty Chandler to definitely get his share.
And Ty Chandler is going later than you would think for a pretty talented running back playing behind an injury prone running back.
Yeah,
so he's a good late round kind of dart throw.
Yeah, we saw last year when Madison was out that they felt comfortable giving a workhorse role to Chandler.
Running back 47.
Yeah, I feel like there's just the quarterback situation means the whole offense is going to be terrible, so we don't want to draft these running backs. And I feel like both running backs are lower than they should be.
But I think Darnold's going to be better than that, though. He's not going to be that bad.
Yeah, I mean he can manage an offense. I think we'll see. Kevin O'Connell's is better than other ones he's been in.
Yeah, I think Kevin O'Connell will get more out of him than people think. I think Darnold's kind of a sneaky QB3 type who's going to have some streaming weeks, especially with without McCarthy there to step in. So.
All right, Greg, another guy you've been bullish on, David Njoku. Despite maybe looking better with Flacco than he did with Watson, obviously we're back to Watson now, but you still like him. Why do you feel that is?
Yeah, well, we did see Njoku and Watson like getting on the same page in their last 3 outings together. Njoku averaged, I think, 11.3 fantasy points per game PPR. Kevin Stefanski, like he's talked about last year and this year that he says Dave is top of the list with who we're trying to get the ball to. And he said a couple times on record, it's no secret that we're trying to get Dave the ball. He's a focal point of this offense for Cleveland, and he's a guy that's going in the like around the 100 range, ADP. So kind of I don't know if you can call him like a discount elite tight end. So same kind of like Brock Bowers thing, except we've seen it with Njoku. And this is an offense that ran the most plays in the NFL last season, and now they're talking about that they want to increase the tempo even more this year. Maybe break the all-time record for offensive plays in a season. But Njoku is just such a key of what they want to do. They're not going to have a strong running game this season. Nick Chubb starting, going to be out at least the first 4 games. Who knows what he'll look like when he comes back? Jerome Ford, okay, running back, but like that's
exactly the right term.
He's not a starting caliber running back, and they just don't have that on their roster. So I think we see a lot go through the passing game. They brought in Jerry Jeudy because they're terrible at drafting wide receivers, and the best way that they can go about it is bringing other guys in. If he ends up being decent, then this could be a nice little passing attack, depending on how Deshaun Watson looks.
John, where do you have Njoku ranked these days?
I've been a little low on him because I'm just looking at all of his splits with Njoku, but he played, or Deshaun Watson played 90% or more of the snaps in 5 games last year. And bear with me here. It wasn't
bearing.
It wasn't necessarily great here. Let's see. First 3 games, 2 for 24, 4 for 48, 4 for 20, and I think he came back for 9 and 10, 4 for 26 and a touchdown, and then 6 for 58. We did get, I think, to Greg's point, those last 2 games with him, he did have 15 targets. So that is huge compared to what was going on like the first 3 weeks. 3 targets, 4 targets, 4 targets. So I think Njoku's like super athletic and has that talent, but I just haven't seen it consistently with Watson. So I've been just a little bit low on him. He's not somebody like Ferguson's the last one that I'm comfortable with as a tight end 1. I've got Njoku at 12 behind Goddard, Bowers, 10, 11. So
Greg, I'm curious. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say Taysom Hill there at 13. I just wanted to mention Taysom Hill.
Yes, of course. Always throw that in. Greg, I'd be curious. This is maybe a little off the beaten path of the questions we've been asking, but when it comes to usage, because you talked about how that's one of your categories, player usage, and when specifically it's receivers, we talk a lot about sometimes what the quarterback likes to target. Like, Aaron Rodgers doesn't like to throw to tight ends or whatever it may be. How much do you, if at all, do you break that down, or do you weigh what the coach says they want to do versus what a quarterback likes to do? And then maybe like in a situation like this with Njoku, well, the team saw what he did when he got targets over the last half of the year, even if a lot of it was with Flacco, maybe that spills over even if Watson wasn't as heavily involving him early on.
Yeah, it's like I was saying earlier about like, okay, when all the pieces align of what the coach is saying and the opportunity is there, and like the quarterback, likes using this type of player or whatever. It is tougher for, pass catchers in this category, because with a running back, like the coach says, we want to give him the ball, and they can just put the ball directly into his hands. With the pass catchers, there's so much more that goes into it. So you really do need to, like, okay, let's look at kind of the metrics of the, whether it's first downs per route run or yards per route run, whatever. Like you need a little bit more to kind of build the picture there, or the perspective picture of what you think things will look like.
Makes sense. Speaking of pass catchers, we got another one. Kenneth Walker in Seattle has been getting a good amount of hype, specifically as a pass catcher. They seem to love him in general. Ryan Grubbs said the words electric at some point as a pass catcher. He is going as the RB16 around like the 4-5 round turn. Do you feel like he deserves more than that? Do you trust this usage breakdown from Grubb?
I think he is probably the running back going in this range who could just absolutely smash in fantasy this season. We hear all the beat stuff. We hear all the, like, the coaches saying that they want to feed him. Kenneth Walker doesn't need to become Christian McCaffrey all of a sudden as a pass catcher. He doesn't need 8 targets per game. Like even if he's getting 3 or 4 targets per game, that's just kind of icing on the cake. If they're already planning on using him as sort of a workhorse in this offense, to me, the biggest X factor here is going to be this offensive line, which they still don't know when Abe Lucas, their right tackle, is going to come back. Not a great offensive line on paper, one of the worst looking ones in the league. But Ryan Grubb started off as an offensive line guy. Mike McDonald called him an O-line guy at heart. We saw when he was at Washington, all the movement that he likes to get with the offensive line, whether it's a run or a screen pass or whatever, of just like moving them around, getting them out in space in front of these guys. It's not like Kenneth Walker has to or is going to be running these like deep wheel routes. He's just he's electric with the ball in his hands. So there are multiple ways to get the ball in a running back's hands without making it like too difficult. We saw this in Tampa Bay last season with Rachaad White when things weren't really working, up the gut and what have you, because that interior offensive line was so bad. So they start throwing him these little like short screen passes or short passes as an extension of the running game. And I think we could see that with Kenneth Walker this year. We all know the juice that he has, and we can talk about the efficiency metrics of, sometimes he takes some big losses in the backfield, like trying to make something happen. But like you just need him to rip some off, which inevitably he's going to do given volume.
Let's go to a running back that is quite different in the sense that I don't know if we're expecting him to rip any off, but he also is getting a lot of hype. Zamir White over in Las Vegas. Antonio Pierce, based off this is my biased interpretation. You tell me how wrong I am. Based off the coaches you've described being trustworthy, I would imagine Antonio Pierce being trustworthy because he seems like the kind of guy who's just going to lay it out there and say what's what. They have said throughout this whole offseason that they want to pound the rock, that they like Zamir White. Obviously, when he came on at the end of last year and got the starting gig, he was 20 plus touches a game, 4 straight weeks. They really hammered that side of the offense. What do you expect now in Antonio Pierce, really taking over from Zamir White in this offense?
Yeah. So the two things that Antonio Pierce says that he wants to do, number one is stop the run on defense. Number two is run the ball on offense. Old school defensive minded coach. He also said last season that his magic number for his running backs is 20 plus. He wants them to touch the ball 20 plus times, whether it's running or catching the ball. With Zamir White, it's probably going to be mostly running. He does get unfairly knocked for his hands. People say he's not a pass catcher, but you go back and look at his targets last season. I want to say it's in the like high 20 range, low 30 range, but didn't have any drops. And he had several where like guys are just draped all over him and he's still catching the ball on these like short little 5-yard passes when like O'Connell's in trouble and guys are bearing down on him, and just hits White over the middle there on his release. Good, just a good running back. People saying that 2024 Zamir White is 2023 Alexander Madison. That's like I feel like it's a pretty lazy comparison. Like, first of all, if we're just talking about the players themselves, like you can start with it, if you want, just their kind of like athletic profile. Like Zamir White, really really fast guy and really really thick guy. The coaches have talked about this, where like it's just unbelievable to them that he is so fast and yet like so strong. And they're saying that Luke Getsy's saying he can't wait to see guys bouncing off of Zamir. The whole like preseason usage of this backfield is like kind of wonky, but it's also just like a wonky preseason for them, because like they were trying to figure out, is it going to be Aiden O'Connell? Is it going to be Gardner Minshew? We saw those two guys throw the ball 20 plus times each in the second preseason game, and we saw kind of a mixture of guys in and out there. Tom Telesco seems to think that Zamir White could use a bit of work in his pass protection. So if the staff feels that way, maybe that's why we don't see him out there as much when guys are throwing the ball. But like, this is like, they're not going to be throwing the ball 40 times per game in the regular season. They're going to be running the ball. Another really big thing to the Raiders is ball security. We heard them talk about this with a QB competition, and Alexander Madison really really bad at holding on to the ball. And we've actually heard offensive coordinator Vikings offensive coordinator Wes Phillips and head coach Kevin O'Connell take like subtle shots at Alexander Madison during press conferences this offseason, when they're talking about ball security and their running back room and how it was a problem last year. And O'Connell got really mad last season when Madison was fumbling the ball. So that's a problem that like could absolutely rear its head in Vegas. And if that happens, like Madison won't be touching the field again. They're not super concerned about Dylan Laube there. I think it's going to be a lot of Zamir White, but biggest problem there is just this offense. Like, how many touchdowns is this offense going to score this year? Probably not a lot. Probably a bottom 5 offense in terms of scoring touchdowns, and that is super super important to your running backs, especially if it's a guy that's not catching 4 or 5 passes a game.
Yeah, Zamir definitely fits that mold of, we need the offense to be great to be great. That doesn't mean he can't be good, though. He feels like I feel like he's guaranteed pretty much to be good. He's one of my favorite targets in this range. It does kind of seem like the fantasy industry on the whole is either very hot on him, like he's going to have 300 touches, or very cold, like this guy's terrible. Why would you ever draft him here? John, he's going at RB 22 in aggregate ADP, back of the 6th-ish, near guys like Ramondre Stevenson, ahead of Najee Harris, behind the Aaron Jones, James Conner tier. How does he project out for you?
Yeah, I'm the one that came up with this question because I saw Greg tweeting about him and wanted to follow up, because I also took him in that point per first down league. I think he's a good value in that type of a format in the 7th round. And I immediately felt kind of gross because it just seems like everybody hates him. So a couple of things I wanted to mention. You talked about how fast he is. I didn't realize. I went to Player Profiler, 4.4 40-yard dash, speed score 96th percentile. As well. Pretty good burst score as well, 64th percentile. It wasn't like super productive in college, but he went to Georgia. I'm sure I forget who he was competing with. I'm sure there's a lot of guys there trying to run the ball. But also just, looking at his time as the starter last year, his rushing grades were better than when, if you look at the whole season, because, he had that 83, 145, 106, 121 total yards in 4 consecutive games. He scored 1 touchdown, caught 9 passes. He was the fantasy RB8 in that span. And this does feel like, okay, you've got a short sample of really productive, and this could fall into the Alexander Madison category. As you mentioned, that's just kind of like, well, all right, 1 + 1 = 2 maybe. But there's also situations where guys, part-time guys or backups, talented backups, have gotten the opportunity. Michael Turner springs to mind when he went from the Chargers to Atlanta and was the number 2 fantasy back that first year in Atlanta. I mean, it happens that way as well. And he was, during that span, there was 41 running backs with 25 total carries in the last 4 weeks. He was 9th in yards after contact per attempt. He was the number 20 PFF rushing grade out of 55 backs in that span. So top third-ish, which isn't bad. And he fared well as a pass blocker in that span as well, even though he has struggled throughout the whole year and as a pass blocker. His rushing grades aren't bad. His receiving grade is like over 70. So I think he's a pretty good all-around back that's going to see if they decide that they're going to feed him. That's the one thing that's been kind of holding me back on this, Greg, is that the preseason usage where he's playing into the third quarter, and this is unprecedented that a player like that, a veteran that's playing into the third quarter, ends up having a good fantasy season. But it's such a small sample.
We've never seen that from a Raiders running back in the past. Definitely haven't seen it from a Hall of Fame game.
Yeah.
But
and look how that turned out.
Yeah. And also you have Pierce calling Alexander Mattison a depth piece when they acquired him. And also this is I think a very underrated offensive line. It's not a deep offensive line at all. Like they can run into some real problems if they get some injuries, especially to like Colton Miller, who's just coming back from an injury there at left tackle, and then the rookie Jackson Powers Johnson. Probably not starting the year, kind of just like mixing in, just because he hasn't been able to do much with a concussion right now in training camp. But like a good offensive line, so bad quarterback play, but like pretty good in all other areas there on offense.
I will throw it out, by the way, because you mentioned the college stats, John, and wondered out loud who else was there in 2019. So he played at Georgia for 3 years. In 2019, he was behind DeAndre Swift. That's a very, very good NFL pro running back. That was his first year. In his second year, which was just 10 games because of COVID, he was the clear bell cow, and James Cook was on the depth chart. And then in 2021, him and James Cook kind of split work. Zamir White was still the lead guy. He saw more touches. He scored more touchdowns. He had more yards than James Cook, who is also a great NFL running back. So, I mean, he didn't have thousands and thousands of yards and 30 touchdown seasons, but he was getting good usage and putting up decent numbers with NFL running backs on the depth chart. I think he might be pretty dang good, and he's getting vastly overlooked. I agree with the Alexander Mattison depth piece comments. And the preseason usage, it is weird, but honestly, of the many options we have to consider, whether to be concerned or to be excited, I'm not too concerned about it. I'm more excited about Zamir White in general. So I draft him above where he's going. But
I'd like to add that the defense was a fantasy surprise last year. They were like 7th in the league. And, Antonio Pierce seems really stubborn about his wanting to run the ball as well. So I don't think that they're going to abandon the running game even if they fall down 10, 14 points in a game. As you mentioned, Greg, the offensive line's pretty good. So like the fantasy production, just in general, how the offense works, at least with him, if he's getting 20, it doesn't matter. He's getting 20 touches. He's going to be a fantasy starter.
Right.
Like the top guys, the top 15, the top 20 guys every year in fantasy are all high, or almost all high touch guys, except for somebody like HN. So, that's when you're in the middle of this. If you're in the 6th, 7th round and you could get a guy who literally has 300 touch upside, then that's a good value pick, regardless of how bad you think the offense might be.
And that's a good point about the defense as well, because like that, the worst thing that can happen to Zamir White is they get blown out in a bunch of games. So we just need that defense to keep it, within 1-2 scores. And absolutely they can do that. This is a good defense.
Just for the fun of it, quick name game. I'll give you guys some running backs. You tell me whether you want Zamir White or this guy, Najee Harris.
Yeah, I'm leaning Zamir now after this discussion.
This is a brutal question. God.
Jaylen Warren injury maybe helps a little bit or hurts
a little bit. I mean, is this for redraft? I'm assuming
redraft. We'll call it half PPR. So,
man, I think I take Najee.
Okay. Raheem Mostert.
Zamir.
I probably would go Mostert due to the upside in that offense.
Interesting.
Because if you have
Ramondre
him,
Stevenson?
you can get starts out of him.
I'm taking Ramondre.
That one's a tough one for me because it's
They
two
are
running
going back
backs.
to back in aggregate ADP.
Wow.
I might go Zamir now.
Okay. Aaron Jones. We talked about him earlier.
I like Jones.
Yeah. I like Jones.
Okay, so maybe he's going in the right range running back wise then, because those were the guys kind of going around him on either end. I think I'd take Zamir over all of those guys except maybe Jones, and I might even lean Zamir unless it was full PPR. Then I definitely lean Jones. But I'm in. I trust Antonio.
Yeah, for me, it's just like there's a lot of running backs going after Zamir White in ADP that I think, could very easily get the same number of points, maybe even more than him, like a Javonte Williams,
I love Javonte Williams.
You can get, rounds later, at least a round later, and then ostensibly you're getting an upgrade at whatever other position you want to pick in this round. So like I get a better receiver or tight end or whatever here, plus I get Javonte Williams later, or do I take Zamir White here and then a round or two later I'm taking like Cortland Sutton or Josh Palmer or something.
Yeah, that's a great call. Javonte is one of my favorite picks this year, so that one I would fully get on board with. There's also guys even going a little after that, like Brian Robinson, Jonathan Brooks, that are intriguing in their own way.
Well, let's ask him about the Cincy backfield, and then let's get him out of here.
There is a pair in Chase Brown and Zach Moss. This is the last question we have in our doc for you, Greg. Chase Brown has been getting a lot of hype, it feels like, in the fantasy Twitter streets. I'm not honestly too sure what the coach speak has sounded like, so maybe you can tell us what you think the breakdown will be in Cincy. Although you don't trust Zach Taylor very much, so that's on the injury stuff. Maybe.
We can trust him on usage and
okay.
Zach Taylor has talked up his pass protection, talking about his lack of errors this training camp, which is very, very big. He says that they're placing a big emphasis on Chase Brown's role. And he said, I think that he's earned that. And he does have an 85% reliability rating on usage and workload coach speak. Then you have the offensive coordinator, Dan Pitcher, talking about how he adds an explosive element to the offense. So I don't know if that's more like it does seem kind of change of pacey, right? Of this adds an explosive element to the offense. I just had like such serious doubts about Chase Brown after his rookie season, even though it wasn't a big sample size. Like a lot of these guys you'll see like highlight reels or whatever of like, I'm drafting this guy this year. With Chase Brown, it's just always that one play, the pass that he breaks off for 50 some yards. I just think he's not like a great runner, like doesn't have great vision. Gets hit in the backfield a lot just because he's a little too hesitant. I just don't love that for a running back, and I don't know like how much that can change over time. Like how is this running back just all of a sudden gonna start seeing the field a lot better and like make quicker, better decisions in year two? Like, I mean, possibly, but saying a guy has juice like only gets me so far on a player. Like, okay, sure, Zach Moss might be a jag or like middle class jag or something, but I mean, do we know that Chase Brown isn't? Like, what has he shown us? Okay, he has shown us he can handle a workload. He showed us that in college. Okay, great. There are a lot of guys who can handle a big workload. He's shown us that he has explosive ability. Okay, fine. A lot of other players have done that as well, but they're not good. Like you look at DeAndre Swift, you look at his metrics. Sure, he has some explosiveness, but he has trouble with his vision. So I don't know if I want to put a lot of eggs in the Chase Brown basket. I'm sure obviously it could burn me. I've taken him here and there when he's dropped. That's kind of been my entire approach to the Cincinnati backfield in best ball is, okay, this guy has dropped enough. Let me go ahead and get some exposure to him here. And then you have Cincinnati, who just throws the ball so much, like one of the highest rates in the league. I think they might have led the league last year in pass percentage. So it's nice if they're using Chase Brown in the pass game, but okay, when we're getting to the goal line now as well, like who's getting that work? Probably Zach Moss. Even though Chase Brown is almost the same size as Zach Moss is just a little bit of a better short yardage runner.
I will throw out to your point about his rushing, because I have seen various metrics throughout this offseason about how they are not good. I pulled up his rushing grade on PFF. 89 running backs with 25 plus carries last year. He was 5th worst in rushing grade, 59.0. The only guys worse were Dearness Johnson, Kenneth Gainwell, Darrell Henderson, and Dalvin Cook. Old broken down Dalvin Cook. So that's not great. That's not what you like to see. I agree. He would absolutely lose goal line touches to Zach Moss. It's tough because he's the kind of guy. I think it's so tough because, to your point, he's the kind of guy who, if he hits big and you feel burned. Whereas, like, if Zach Moss hits and we pass on Zach Moss, he'll probably be like a low-end RB2. It won't matter that much. He won't be that exciting, I would expect, unless he scores 15 touchdowns. John, are you super in or super out? We've had some talk about Chase Brown on the pod this offseason.
Yeah, I pulled some of the same. I have similar numbers from PFF. 113 out of 129 running backs in rush grade last year, 59.0. Preseason of this year is only 5 carries for 10 yards. 67th out of 172 running backs, so it's a little bit better.
Good.
He's more, but I mean, it's only 5 carries. I did notice that his pass protection was brutal last year. It was like under 30 grade. In the preseason so far, 72.9, but I don't even know how many pass blocking opportunities he's had if he's only carrying the ball, 5 times in the preseason. So I don't know, it's got to be a really small sample as well. So that's what I'm worried about with him. And, when Zach Moss got signed after Joe Mixon left, I just felt like Moss was going to get all that Mixon work. And if they didn't want Mixon on the field on third down, he wasn't a good pass blocker either, but they would throw him the ball quite a bit. For a player that didn't play much on third down. Like, it just seems like Chase Brown's going to be the pass catcher and Zach Moss is going to be the primary runner. But the way that the preseason has set up, or at least what you see on practice and everything, it's like Chase Brown's getting the first reps, or is RB1A and Moss is RB1B or something like that. And that kind of gives me pause. It's like he is a dart throw that's in that 10th, 11th round range where he might have a lot of upside if he does indeed get lead back touches, but there's just nothing in his resume so far to indicate that he is a better runner than Zach Moss, who was pretty good stretches in last 2 seasons in Indianapolis when Jonathan Taylor was out.
It seems almost Alexander Madison-y.
We found the real Alexander Madison.
I think even Madison had games where he was the lead back that pointed to the fact that he was going to be capable.
Yeah.
I don't know that we have
right now he's going ahead of Gus Edwards and Jerome Ford. I'm taking both those guys ahead of him because I just want the stability. But if he drops a little below that range to like the Trey Benson, Blake Corum area, which is less than a round after him, then I'd absolutely rather snatch up Chase Brown. So it really does depend on where he's going, kind of like you said, Greg. If he drops, I'll try to get some pieces. Any closing thoughts from you? Any big storyline things you're watching as we head into the last week of the offseason, pretty much?
I'm definitely been keeping tabs on the Bucks. Obviously my love for Jalen McMillan is well known. I've been touting him since they first started talking about him months ago after the draft. Really felt like he was going to immediately take over that wide receiver 3 spot. He was going in the final rounds of drafts, and I was just like scooping up as much as I could. And now he's really risen. But I'm also watching, Bucky Irving in the preseason, and he was a guy that I was like pretty out on because just the way that Todd Bowles talks about how much pass protection is important to him, and he's having this team meeting, or he's talking to the team, and he's talking about the running backs of like, okay, you got to carry, you got to catch, and you got to pass block, and he says pass block 3 times, so like how important it is to him. And Bucky Irving was in the 11th percentile of pass blocking running backs coming out of this class. But then you look at preseason, not a ton of opportunities in pass blocking, just a handful, but like looked pretty decent in that area. I have always loved like what he can do when the ball is in his hands. So just very interested to see if he can kind of keep that up in the regular season against first string linebackers that are coming at him instead of fourth string linebackers on the Dolphins. Absolutely something that I'm keeping my eye out for, but I still feel like it's going to be just a ton of Rachaad White this year. Todd Bowles says you don't see many running backs in the league like Rachaad White. They have an upgraded interior offensive line now. I think he gets a lot of work.
I'll have to look into drafting a little more Rachaad White. I don't think I've done too much of it, unfortunately. But hey, he catches passes like just about nobody else.
It's a tough area to draft him in. Like, even though I like him a lot this year, it's just there's a lot of great wide receivers going there. Sometimes Anthony Richardson will slip now, especially after this past preseason game. Just an area where I'm not usually taking running back there.
And Walker's going in that same range now, and the hype seems to be on him. Bucky, I just want to mention Bucky Irving's pass grade in preseason is 79.9 after just a brutal pass grade in college. Okay. So maybe he's again. Bucky. I don't know how many opportunities we have, but
it's not. I want to say it's like 3 pass blocking.
Okay. So pretty well.
All right. Well, it was great to have you on, Greg. This was a ton of good information, good stuff. Tell the listeners where they can find you, where they can find the Coach Speak Index, all that goodness.
Yeah, you can find me online on Twitter at CoachSpeakIndex. And then there's a link to our private Discord in there. You might notice I'm not posting quite as much stuff on Twitter these days. It's because I launched the Discord and I'm watching, like 12 hours of press conferences every day. And I'm just not 12, it's more like 8-ish hours, but it takes about 12 hours to get through them and write down notes. So yeah, I'm every single important note from every press conference, from every head coach, offensive coordinator, general manager goes in straight into the Coach Speak Index Discord, which is linked in our Twitter bio. And that's just like from it's all here, really. There's like a 5-week break where there's nothing, but it's so much crucial information, a lot of stuff that I just don't have time or like can't post online. But like you hear about guys like Carson Steele a couple weeks in the Discord before we heard about him in the overall fantasy world. So yeah, a lot of crucial info in there. And if you're serious about winning your fantasy leagues and you're playing for money, then you definitely want to jump in there. We've got people from different sites trying to glean information early. And apply that to their projections and rankings and what have you. So yeah, wouldn't want to be playing fantasy without access to all that information.
Cool, good stuff. John, are you going to start those week 1 projections, or are you going to hold off?
I'll try to do them by the end of this weekend, but otherwise they'll be up on Tuesday for sure. And I've got one more article coming out. Final thoughts for the last draft weekend. Released Paulsen's players late last week as well. Basically my round by round targets, and I'm doing three podcasts this week. So I'm 1 down, 2 more to go. Going on Fantasy Mansion tomorrow for, I'm sure it'll be a 2-hour extravaganza before we do a late round pod on Wednesday, right, Matt?
Yep. Sleepers. All righty. Cool. Thanks a lot, guys. Good to have you. We'll see you all very shortly at the start of the season. Adios.